am Geisha, a name given to me as I was told, because I smelt like fish when I was brought to the orphanage. I grew up in an orphanage, that is what it is popularly called in my locality, but it is not for orphans as the name implies. It is an institution established to care for the rejected and forsaken children of the world. But is it really as they say? I grew up not knowing my roots or origin. All I knew was what I was told by the mistress and her workers. The mistress was the woman in charge of taking care of all the children living in the orphanage. It was said that I was picked from the dustbin, where I was almost eaten alive by wild pigs. But my screams alerted some scavengers, and that was how my life was spared, even though my own mother rejected me. The orphanage was a desolate place, hidden away from the bustling city life. It comprises of crumbling buildings surrounded by overgrown bushes and rusty fences that seemed to scream out the despair and hopelessness of the children within. The walls echoed with the silent cries of those who had been abandoned. The mistress ruled with an iron fist, her eyes always cold and distant, as if it had long forgotten the warmth of laughter. But in the midst of the hopelessness, there were moments of solaces, for I had a big brother. His name was Steve. He was my word. I followed Steve everywhere, even to the toilet. I just sit outside until he was out, but never once did he tire of me. He told me to never lose sight of him. So life in the orphanage, despite the lack of food and clothes, was not all bad when I was still a baby. There is something about most orphanages that most people don't know, especially the kind people who seek to help children in our situation the best they can. Your help most times benefits those who are in charge better than the children they were meant for. Do I mean don't give? No, not at all. But ensure, if you can, that what was brought reached those they were meant for. When I was 10 years old, a kind woman came to our home one day with lots of gifts and food items, the likes of which I have never seen before. Clothes, footwear, underwears, everything I could think of was what she brought to us. In my young eye, they were enough to give all the children a change of wardrobe. Well, if you will call the sacks we wore a wardrobe, time we were wearing overgrown clothes for those who had anything to wear at all. Our food was better described as watery soups, and that is once a day. We were happy in our little world because we had nothing to compare it with. We were not allowed to go out for any reason. Our only glimpse into the outer world is through the pages of the few books the mistress allowed us to take because she finds no use or harm in them. I was lucky to have been taught how to read at the age of 5 by Steve before he died right in my arms. So with my books and Steve, I was happy with my world until it came crumbling down one day. Steve got sick but never told anyone, except that I had noticed he was getting weak by the day. Even though I gave him a portion of my soup which he rejected, but he didn't get any stronger until he couldn't eat anymore. No matter how much I pleaded, he still could not get a spoon past his mouth. He was the family I knew. He protected me from the other kids and made sure I had clothes in the cold seasons. Even if it meant he had to be naked, he was my covering, a covering that was taken from me one cold morning. Some days before that, I had gone to the mistress to report the matter to her. Then my brother was very sick, but she looked at me and said, "He will get better like every other child does, and if he doesn't, there is nothing she can do about it." When I kept going back, she asked one of her assistants to give me a beating, but I didn't mind because what I wanted was for Steve to get better. But my efforts were like water poured on stone because I woke up one morning to his stiff, cold body. his head resting on my thin arms. I didn't understand why he was so cold. His skin had never felt that cold to my touch, no matter how sick he had been. So I removed the shirt he must have used to cover me during the night and covered him with it, as I rubbed his pan like he used to do for me. But he never got warm. He didn't open his eyes. Neither did he make an attempt to smile. Steve always had a smile for me, no matter what. I had called his name so much that the attention of the other children were alerted. They were coming closer to our corner now, so I tried shaking him gently, but his body had gotten stiff and heavy. Another older child came to us then and tried opening his mouth, but it wouldn't open. She turned to me then with a look in her eyes that broke my little heart, even though I didn't understand it at that time, but I knew something was badly wrong. She tried to carry me away from Steve, but I refused. How was I supposed to leave him so cold? What if he wakes up and needed something and I was away? So I stayed. I held his head on my laps until the mistress came with some persons I have never seen before, and despite my screams, he was taken from me. I never saw Steve again, and as I understood later that he had died. I wish I knew where they had buried him. I would have gone visiting, but he was taken from me. But to me, he was everything. My mother and father, my brother, my friend. He was everything to this poor orphaned girl who was abandoned in a dustbin. It was after his death I knew what being alone truly meant. I understood the true meaning of being abandoned. But I digress. I shall return to this dark period of my existence at Hope Orphanage as the story progresses. But let me continue the tale of the kind woman who came with lots of goodies. She arrived with a bus, and after the usual prayers and songs, the mistress, as usual, wanted to take hold of what was brought with a smile of benevolence. She told the woman, "We will receive them as instructed, but the items needs to be selected accordingly, so everyone will receive equally." And seeing that there are lots of things, she wouldn't want the kind woman to be delayed unnecessarily. It sounded believable. I almost believed her myself, but I have seen too much, known too much to believe anything that comes from that mouth. The woman fortunately was keen on doing the distribution herself, so she insisted, and this didn't go down well with the mistress and her goons. They stood aside when they saw the woman wouldn't be persuaded otherwise. They were scared of arousing suspicion. The woman, with the help of those that came with her, began to share and distribute the items according to age and size, and she made sure each of us changed right into the clothes while they were present. She shared the food they brought, except for the raw food items. Every other thing she brought, she distributed by herself to the children. After she was done, she handed the raw food items to the mistress and her assistants. For the first time ever, I wore shoes that didn't hurt my feet or felt too big. After the woman had done all she came with, she prayed with us and asked us to pray for her as well. And all the children, with their stomach filled and their hearts gladdened, prayed in the little way they could. But I assure you, we prayed with everything in our heart. In the evening, when she left with her people, I watched her leave, and I felt as though I was losing a mother. Later that night, as we all lay down sleeping, I was woken up from my slumber by a noise beyond the hall. I really do not sleep deep. In my word, in order not to wake up naked, you have to learn how to sleep with one eye open. And if you're unfortunate, you will wake up naked outside with rats and snake bites if you are very unlucky. So the night of the woman's visitation, I heard noises coming from the kitchen area. I looked around and nobody seemed to be awake or alert enough, so I stood up, folded my mat and hid it. If not, I may come back and not meet it there again. I tiptoed to the door leading to the kitchen and looked through the keyhole. I saw all the food items that were brought divided up, and the mistress was sharing it among her assistants. I crawled back to my space before she comes in. I took all the items in my care and used them to make a bed, laying my mat over them. The moment I lay down, I opened my eyes slightly and saw them gathering the items of those who left theirs in the lockers. I shut my eyes to avoid being detected. I must have slept off at some point because I woke up to the sounds of crying and fighting. Those whose items had been taken were either fighting with those who they can beat or fight with, or they were just crying if they couldn't do anything. I lay there with my eyes shut, but I was very alert. One of the things Steve taught me before his death was to know how to choose my battles. I didn't understand most of what he was saying then because I was too young to understand. And also, I felt I didn't have need of them when he was around. But those I could remember had helped me to navigate our little but dangerous world without much loss and pain as some of the children in my age bracket had suffered. What I witnessed at night was a regular occurrence, and I had fallen victim several times before, so I have learned to protect what I can when I can. There were 4 children under my care, ages 3, 4, and 6. 2 of them were 4 years old. So they were in my corner and anything about them was under my protection. You must be wondering what can a 10-year-old girl do in the midst of much older children of 14, 16. Yes, 16 is the oldest. Because once you turn 17, you are let out into the world and never allowed to come back. So what power do I have against the older children, you may ask? You see, Steve never stopped protecting me even in his death. He was the most feared child in the orphanage. According to the stories that I heard, he was not afraid of anybody, not even the mistress. He had fought with the mistress so much that a truce had come into operation. He doesn't disturb her while she does the same. I think they were bidding the time he will leave because he died at 16. So he had only 1 year before his freedom. That was what we called going into the world. Because no matter how you see it, there would be nothing worse than what we were seeing at the orphanage. So after he died, those that took over from him didn't really disturb me. They left his corner to me and didn't try to take his belongings from me as well. I think it is because we all lost a hero. When he was around, bullying was not that much, and our soup, despite being watery, was a bit tasty, and we had fresh bread. After his set left, I had grown a bit to know how to defend myself. I was small of build, but Steve told me it was my advantage because I could run faster and hide better. So even after those who respected Steve had all gone, I defended my territory with scars to show for it. But I was able to gain enough respect to be left alone. The 4 children I brought under my care were the only ones who survived infancy in their set. A set is categorized by what month you were brought in a single year. So even if you are 2 months old, as long as you were brought in the same month as a 6 years old, you are all one set. So all 4 were the sole survivors in their individual sets, and I took them in because other sets wanted nothing to do with them. And the 3-year-old was looking like death. At the time, nobody believed he would live beyond the night. When he was brought in, but each morning he wakes up refusing to give up. He was the first I took under my wing. With the help of another girl warrior, he was cared back to life. I think what everyone needs is a little bit of attention, a little bit of knowing they matter. That will give them hope to continue fighting, no matter how hard it got. Steve was that for me. He chose me, a sickly, forsaken child. He loved me and protected me like I mattered. And his love gave me the courage to survive all that I survived till I could tell my story to the world. I knew him very briefly. I was only 6 years when he died, but those years laid the foundation of who I am today. This is not a story about Steve, but my story cannot be told without him. For there is no geisha without Stephen. Even my name was from him. I was initially called Fish Bean because they said I smelt like fish and I was picked from the bean. But instead of that, Stephen called me Geisha. He said if I was going to be called a fish, I might as well be called a delicious one, he explained. Which is why I will always have that in my legal papers. It was his legacy and I have no intention of throwing it away. That Steve was roughly snatched from my trembling arms. I lost the will to live. I couldn't eat. At some point, I couldn't stand. All I kept hoping for was that maybe I would get to go where he was taken. But Carton, 6 years old, was a baby then, and his pitiful cries throughout the night always kept me awake. And each time I wanted to slip away into unconsciousness, the cries would draw me back. It was those cries that gave me a new purpose. So I decided that I will live to help him, just the way Steve had helped me. And after he is grown like me, I can go and join my brother. That was my decision then, but now I want to live more than anything so that I can honor the memories of my hero better. I realized that I would be more useful to him alive than dead, so I had fought to stay alive since then. When I was 12 years, the mistress came to ask for volunteers. She does this once in a while and she usually takes the older kids. They come back with money and some goodies. So every child always wanted to go. When she came down, I raised my hand because I felt she might not know my real age as I had grown into a big kid. Got picked along with the three oldest kids. She told us to be up and ready before dawn the following day. Where we were going or what we were going to do, we were never told. But I didn't mind because all I wanted was to make some money. When I leave the orphanage, I intend to carry my four along. I didn't know much about the world except for what I had read in the few books I had. I was also teaching my four to read, as I was taught. I am sure we will be able to manage outside. The world out there can be any more cruel than what we see inside the orphanage. So the following day, we set out before dawn. We were taken to a run-down factory where we were given cleaning equipment and shown where to clean. The odor oozing from there was blinding. Luckily, we were given a nose mask, so only our eyes suffered. Tears flowed as if there was some sort of chemical, but the place wasn't lit enough for me to read the labels on some of the containers. After what seemed like hours, we finished up and it was time to go. We were not given anything to eat or drink. It wasn't part of the agreement, they said. By the time we came out, I realized the sun was setting. So we had been cleaning from dawn until sunset in a polluted environment without food or water. But I kept my hope on the money. We were paid directly, which I guessed the mistress didn't like. But she seemed to be afraid of the boss sitting at the far end of the room because she kept glancing cautiously at him. Immediately we were told to go. I divided the money into two and hid one portion inside my private area. When we got into the van, the mistress demanded for the money or else we won't be allowed to come back. We all gave her the portions in our hands. I realized the others did as I did. Some even gave her less. She searched us as best as she could and found some person's phone, but she didn't find mine and that of another boy. We told her that was all we were given, and since she couldn't go back to ask them, she gave us half of what we gave her. I was glad. This money was going to go a long way for us. I was already making plans on how to use it. The van stopped and we were asked to come down and buy whatever we wanted to. I went in to get a little thing for my four. I was going back to the van ahead of the others as I didn't want to spend more than I budgeted. Suddenly, someone hit me with such force that we both fell. When I successfully extracted myself from the tangle, I looked down and realized it was a madman. At least he looked like one. No one seemed to want to get close to him. I made to move away, but he grabbed my legs, and looking back, I saw his eyes pleading at me. I stood motionless out of surprise because those eyes doesn't seem like that of a mentally challenged person. So I went close, and he indicated with his hand that he wanted a drink. I gave him the water I was holding, and he immediately gulped it down. I took another sachet from a vendor standing around watching us. He finished it too and laid back, closing his eyes. I waited for him to open them but realized he had passed out. At a loss on what to do. I couldn't leave him there, but I didn't know the first thing to do in order to help. I tried talking to onlookers, but they started dispersing, no one willing to lend a helping hand. I unclasped my hand from his grab, left there and ran to the fan, hoping to get help from the mistress, but the van was nowhere to be found. I asked around, and the people there told me the van had left over 30 minutes ago. I was shocked. I had spent that amount of time with the old man. I became more confused and frightened, feeling stranded. I stood and calmed my nerves, collecting my racing thought, and an idea came to me. I went to the taxi park around the corner and met the oldest looking person there. I explained my ordeal and he looked at me for a long time, and coming to a decision, he nodded and followed me, calling two packed out to follow him too. We got to where I had left the elderly man. He was still lying on the floor. The Baba checked and said he was still alive, and asked the two boys to help him carry the man to his taxi. I followed, forgetting the bag of goodies I had bought for my fall. When we got to a clinic, the Baba called for nurses and he was carried inside. I was asked who he was. I told them he was my grandfather who had gone missing. I gave the taxi driver the agreed fare and he left having done his part. The remaining money I had in my hand left out a few bucks. I used the rest for deposits for his treatment, but I was told that it was too small. I promised them that my parents were on their way, so they attended to him, cleaned him up, and gave him some injections. The doctor said he fainted from exhaustion and malnutrition, asking if they needed to call the police. I quickly said, please, my parents will be in a better position to answer when they arrived. I was given a chair to wait outside his ward. When the attention of the nurses were elsewhere, I crept out and ran. I had done my best for the old man. I pray his people finds him and takes him back to safety. I have my own troubles. One being that I lost the bag of goodies I got for my fall, and all the money I had was gone. I don't know how to get back to the orphanage, as I have never been out of it without the mistress, and it was always inside the van without windows. I have no idea on how to get back. If you cash with me, I don't know how far it will take me. I saw a woman selling food by the roadside. I wanted to eat something because my tummy was rumbling as I haven't eaten throughout that day. But I was scared of spending what little I had. So I went to her to ask how I could get back to town, describing the orphanage and the area that I could remember it was located. She shouted that it was a far place from where we were, but she told me nonetheless after trying to find out I was out and about by myself. I told her I was sent on an errand and I lost my way. I left there and began to trek in the direction she told the buses take. I walked until I had no strength left, and by this time it was very dark. And for the first time in a long time, I felt scared. I didn't know where I was. I was worried about my fall. What were they told happened to me? What would they be thinking by now? In my confusion and fear, I must have walked back because I suddenly found out I was standing right in front of the hospital crying. The security guard saw me and asked what I was doing. I quickly told him I brought someone to the hospital earlier. He took me inside, recognizing my face, and told the nurses he had found me. I tried to run, but he grabbed me. I became afraid, not knowing what was happening. What if the old man had died? What am I supposed to do with the corpse of a stranger? Would I be accused of something? What will they do if they found out that I didn't know the man from anywhere? What do I do? Why did I even come back? I made to run, but she held me tight and almost dragged me to an office. I was crying very loudly at this point, so scared, pleading with her that I was just trying to help. But she just kept saying, calm down, calm down. When we got to the office, I saw military personnel standing around and she told them I was the girl, so they allowed us inside. I ceased my struggles at this point, staring at the people seated there. A man was seated and the rest, including the doctor, were standing when I entered. The man turned around when we entered and stood up, looking intently at me. He looked sternly at the nurse and told her to let go of me. He squatted down and gently stretched his hand towards me, waiting. I went forward. It wasn't as if I had a choice anyway. He held my hand ever so gently and smiled. That smile transformed his face into such radiance that I temporarily forgot I was afraid. In that brief moment, it felt as though everything was going to be all right. But I was brought back to reality when a nurse burst in calling for the doctor. She said the elderly patient was going into shock. They all rushed out, including the gentleman, but he held onto my hand back and saw men in suits and military uniform walking briskly ahead, looking around and talking into their wrists as if there is a threat everywhere. Couldn't wrap my head around what was happening, but one thing I was sure is that I was being held by a very important hand. Somehow, that gave me a bit of a relief because I didn't do anything wrong anyway, so whatever may happen cannot be all that bad, right? After coming to this conclusion, I became calm and followed the man willingly. When the doctor came out, he told the gentleman that his father was stabilized now, but he needed to be under constant monitoring until further notice. I looked through the glass window to see who the fuss was all about, and all I saw was a clean-shaven, skinny-looking elderly man with wires and tubes all around him. I wondered again what connection I had to do with all this. The gentleman turned to me then and looked at me like I mattered. No one had ever looked at me like that since Steve. He smiled gently and told me to follow him. We walked back to where I realized was the doctor's office, but I refused to look at him. He cleared his throat and waited, but getting no response from me, he asked for my name. I told him, still staring at the floor. He said, "You are geisha? What language is that?" I told him, "Geisha, the fish that you eat." He laughed. I said, "Wow, that is an interesting name. Who gave you the name?" "My elder brother, Steve." But still, I couldn't look at him. He eventually asked that I raise my head because he wanted to see my face. I did, but refused to look at him. He asked about my parents. I told him I don't know. When he pressed for details, I decided to tell him everything I could remember, just so he would stop. I told him where I grew up and how I got to grow up there. He then asked how I was at the market that day and why I saved the old man. I looked at him then, wondering how he found out about the old man. He smiled, maybe at the look on my face or something, because I don't find anything going on right now funny in any way. When I didn't say anything further, he went ahead to explain. "You see, that man you saved is my father." I don't think my face at this point needed to be described. I looked at him open-mouthed as he continued without missing a beat. "You know, he went missing some months back, and after searching for him without success because of his health condition, we assumed he was dead. It was such a great shock when I received a call from my friend here that he may have found my father. But we looked for you and you were nowhere to be found. You are our hero. So why did you run away? On finding out that I wasn't in any trouble, I gained a little confidence and decided to tell them my predicament. After explaining my encounter with the elderly man and how we ended up at the hospital, I told them my worry about getting back to the orphanage. He asked if he could hold my hand. I looked at him funny and nearly retorted that he asked that a bit too late. But I quickly got a hold of myself and nodded instead. He took my hand in his and said, "Thank you." Those words had my head jerking up. I don't think I have ever had those words directed at me since Steve died, not even from my four. Not that I was expecting any thank you from them, but it was really unsettling when I heard them from the gentleman. He repeated them again and then suddenly asked me, "Do you even know who I am?" I shook my head. He smiled and said, "That is okay. You will find out soon enough."